Hey everyone, thanks for joining me at Silent Air Photography. I'm super excited today to bring you an interview with Dustin Main, an outstanding photographer, storyteller, and world traveler. Besides photography and traveling, Dustin has spoken at the World Domination Summit in Portland about turning inspiration into action. He's raised more than $20,000 for the charity One Girl by doing amazing things in a schoolgirl's dress. And he's also just finished a 5-year-long documentary photography project in Myanmar called This Myanmar Life, which has just been released online and as well as at a gallery live in his hometown of Saskatoon, Canada. I had a lot of fun talking with Dustin and getting his take on travel, specifically in Myanmar, photography, storytelling. He's got some absolutely great stories and insights, and let's get to it. So, hey, Dustin, I'm super excited to have you on today to get to know you a little better and talk about your This Myanmar Life project that you're just, I guess, in the midst of. You've finished the photography portion of it and are now unleashing it on the world, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder if you could just let us know a little bit more about yourself and what the project's all about.
Sure. So my name is Dustin Main. I'm a Canadian, but I sort of left Canada about 6 years ago or so to kind of travel around the world for a year, and that 1 year has sort of turned into like 6 and going sort of years. And along the way, and this was about 5 years ago, I sort of chanced upon a trip to Myanmar, and I know I had wanted to go there for a while, but it just hadn't quite happened. And I sort of like slipped across the border this one day, doing a border run, slipping across the border. It wasn't slipping. I went across the border, and at the time I was living in northern Thailand, and I just remember kind of like crossing the bridge into Myanmar and like this whole other world opening up to me, like where adventure is around every corner and you never know what's going to happen. So, that one little event, about 5 years ago, that who would have known at the time that would lead into more than a dozen trips to the country, and this project that I've been building called This Myanmar Life.
Okay, that's awesome. I was able to go just for a month. I guess that was last year. And it was, I was in Thailand and kept kind of hearing, people kind of whispering like, oh yeah, Myanmar. I was in northern Thailand as well, and people kept talking about it as this exotic place, and everybody who went there just raved about it, but it wasn't kind of mainstream. And so I was there with my girlfriend, and it was kind of like we kept hearing all this stuff and like, well, maybe like, should we go? It wasn't in our plans, but eventually we were like, well, okay, we're here. We've got a chance to go, and it was a great trip there, only for a month, but definitely that short amount of time makes me want to go back. I'm curious about what your initial impressions of the country were when you first went.
That first time I was only across the border for maybe like a couple of hours, and I just remember it, in comparison to Thailand, and I've traveled to many parts of the world, so it wasn't that I hadn't seen contrasts before, but I just remember looking back into Thailand and seeing this completely different world that was 100 meters away.
Yeah.
And here where things were, it was dirty, it was dusty, it was like, I remember like the glow of the sun. It was getting like later in the afternoon, and these like very distinct shadows as this kid was driving by on his bicycle on the road. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know like how things worked, and I think it was like as soon as I got back home that night, back to my apartment, that like I was already planning like my first big trip. It had been overdue anyways, but yeah, it was Yeah, I knew that there was something special. I needed to figure it out. I needed to figure out how this place worked, and it's only taken me 5 years to get a sliver of that. It seems like I'm not sure that you could ever figure out everything about this place.
Yeah,
but I mean, that was certainly a driving force. Like, how does this place work? Because it doesn't operate by the rules that so many other places do.
Right. So then, what was your first actual trip there for a more extended period of time?
The first big trip there was a couple months later, and I didn't know much about the country, and I was only kind of like, I was partially organizing it, and so what we ended up doing was, oddly enough, avoiding and not going to all of the places that people normally go to,
right?
Which was kind of interesting. And yeah, I remember even like the first day. So we flew in, and starting on that first morning that I was kind of like walking around, and already like things were just happening in the way that things do there. You just sort of like let things happen, and they just come to you, and that just happened over and over and over again. Like every day it was just so packed full of like interesting stuff and meeting interesting people that like it was exhausting. Like it was just exhausting for every day to be like jam packed, and it wasn't trying to plan it or trying to do this thing. It was all of these things that just seemed to be happening by chance, and it's just the randomness of this place, and just like allowing myself to kind of like go with the flow, and boom, magic. I seem to be like very light on details on that, but that's what it was like when I'm thinking back right now. I'm just thinking like how is it even possible for all of these like crazy and amazing things to just happen like one after another? And that's just how it was. And it was exhausting, and it was addicting. It wasn't that much longer, much later, that I was back again for another extended stint, and another one and another one. Like that just happens over and over again.
Did you fly into Yangon initially, or Mandalay?
Initially, the only option that there was at that time was flights into Yangon from Bangkok, I think. Yeah. Oddly enough, like nowadays, there's flights like to and from piles of places in the region, but at that time, the airport had like 3 gates, and flights to Bangkok, and then internal flights, and that was probably pretty much it. Yeah. Which is pretty interesting compared to now, where they've got all these international flights, and that place is nuts. And definitely. Okay, yeah. We flew into Mandalay, so I haven't actually seen the Yangon airport, but the Mandalay one was, I imagine, probably what the Yangon was when you first went there. There was, kind of one lineup coming in and out, and very like the parking lot was empty but massive, and there are then these big roads leading out of it with no traffic on it, and like the few people on the flight kind of in their taxis, and that was it. And we were like, what? Where are we? Where are we? That's like Myanmar in a nutshell. So I guess it's just the random coincidences and spontaneity that kept you going back, that hooked you initially. Yeah, initially, and then as time wore on, it wasn't on that first trip that I was working on this project necessarily, although there were things from those first big trips that have made it into the project. Yeah. But it got to be like witnessing the changes that were happening, like between my first big trip and my second big trip, and on, seeing these major changes happen like before my eyes, where I'd leave the country, I'd come back 6 weeks later, and there are these visual, like in your face sorts of differences that would be hitting me in the face. Yeah. That changes that in other parts of the world, they would happen over the course of decades, and here some of those things are happening in the course of months. Yeah. And so seeing that stuff, and at first was very interesting because I wanted to understand how the things were working.
Yeah.
And then it got to be, okay, so these changes are happening. What sort of effects are these changes in this special time that's been going on? Like, what are these? How are these changing? I think of it like, how are these affecting the stories of people's lives?
Right.
What's changing in their lives as these other changes are going on? And in some cases, it's very little or nothing.
Yeah.
And in other cases, it's changing lives. And and so I wanted to know, what that was all about. Why, what kind of effect is that having on people? How is this molding like the future of the people, the citizens of the country?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that this project is, it's a photographic project to some extent, but it's much more a storytelling project with a heavy dose of photography. So I'm wondering, from a photographic aspect, when you're traveling somewhere new, what's your approach? Are you looking for, from a photography kind of perspective, looking for interesting things, or are you more focused on the experience and, you've got your camera with you walking around and just kind of taking it as it comes?
It sort of depends. I think that in the past, what I would do is I would just have that camera out and I'd be taking pictures of cool stuff. And nowadays, in the last few years, as my work has sort of grown and I've like understood things a little bit better and understood how my eyes are seeing things, I'm much more patient with that stuff. So I know that there are some things that you have to catch like right in the moment.
Yeah.
And you should be at least a little bit ready for that. But the power of like seeing what's going on, like as a bigger picture, something that's much bigger than you can see through your viewfinder. And in seeing that, then you can better, understand what's going on. And so that's part of it. I'm more patient, and I'm not so quick on the draw, particularly when I come to a new place.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is that, I knew that when I traveled to places that my camera would affect my experience.
Right.
And years ago, when I was just traveling through places, a little bit, I was capturing landscapes and things like that. I didn't really pay much attention to it. I didn't think so much about it. But as I started photographing people more often, and trying to get what I wanted, like trying to capture the picture that I wanted,
right?
You sort of realize that if somebody was to come to me in the street and stick a camera in my face, like how would I react? Like what would I do? I probably wouldn't be terribly happy about it. I'd be skeptical.
Yeah.
Because like we don't do that. Like that's not polite. And I was never, in fact, I didn't really shoot portraiture in the past because I was so concerned of that. I was so concerned with like offending people.
Yeah.
So I just wouldn't even shoot that kind of stuff. And so now what it is it's just about like when I come to somewhere new, or even if I'm not new, like I want to come in there and my camera stays in my bag, and my bag is like on my side. Like it's not like a backpack where it's hard to get at. Like I can pull it out. It's not too big of a deal, but the camera stays in there. Like if I'm wandering around somewhere new, like I'll try to not take that thing out for half an hour, maybe a day if I'm like in a town and I'm wandering around, because I don't want to be a walking camera to people, because people will react to me differently as a walking camera. Whereas if I'm a human being, which is what I hope I am, like that's the way I want to. It's the way I want to show up in the world. Then I'm treated differently, and as it turns out, like that gets me much better photos, because I, by speaking in the case of in Myanmar, like speaking some of the language and being respectful, being interested, my curiosity, like that's easy. then the photo stuff comes really easily.
Right.
It's not a challenge, because it's comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So how do you go about scouting stories? I'm sure you had many more potential stories than you've included in the final exhibit. But when you're getting to the country and you're getting to talking with people, I'm sure you're on the lookout. I assume for at least once the project was underway, I'm assuming you were on the lookout for interesting people, stories.
Yeah. It wasn't until the last couple of years although I'd been collecting information, I'd been collecting stories, I'd been meeting people, I'd been taking photos, like it was sort of like I was amassing all of this stuff, but I didn't know what it would be.
Okay.
And it wasn't until the last probably year and a half or so that what it would be started to come together. This mating of stories and photographs kind of came to be. And when I think of the photos that are in this exhibit, and this exhibit is part of what will be in my book later this year, oftentimes, it wouldn't be that I'd go out scouting, trying to be like asking people for like, oh, who's your most interesting friend or something like that. It would just be the way that things sort of happened. And I won't say that every person that I met had like a super amazing story or anything like that, but like the first thing that comes to mind is that pretty much everybody does have like a really incredible story, and sometimes it's harder to communicate that, like, and I get that. Something that I think is incredible and that other people might think is incredible, to the person that I'm speaking with, that's just like a regular part of their life. Like it sort of depends on the lens that you look at. So that kind of coaxing out of a story, I suppose, like asking questions and seeing where that takes you. That was the part of it. But I chanced into meeting a lot of really incredible people in this project, and if that's what chance does you, like just wandering around and talking to random people does, then like that country is obviously just jam packed with just like the most incredible stories, and that makes me feel really good.
That's cool. So I guess a lot of that was just being personable and developing the relationship between you and whoever you're talking to, and the stories would find their way out through that. Yeah, for sure. Like, as an example, I'll try to make this like a Cliff Notes version, but well, how about this one? So I've got this one photo of this man named So Ong, and it just so happened that one of my friends who's a guide, he was telling me that he was going to take me to this village that I'd never been to, and we'd be kind of out on canoes on Inlay Lake, kind of in these like in this side region, and so we just went out, and we were going out for the day, and like we weren't thinking about like doing anything. It was just like, hey, we're just going to go and hang out, see what happens. And so I see this guy walking, kind of like walking up on this path that they have, kind of like these canals on the lake, and there's a gentleman who's walking, and he's holding kind of like a stick with two baskets on the end, and it's filled with grass. Okay. And I see this guy, and it looks good. I want to take a picture, so I yell out at him in Burmese, and I ask him if it's okay if I take a picture. Yeah. And he says yes. And so I go ahead and I take a couple of shots. Yeah. And I thank him, and I yell out, and I ask his name, and he tells it to me, I think, but we were sort of getting far enough that I couldn't hear anyways. And that was that. Like, okay. So I was like, okay, well, I took a picture. Yeah. And that evening, I get back, it's in the middle of the day. I can't see the pictures on my camera anyways. Yeah. I get back that night, and I see this picture with this like crazy deep blue sky, these puffy clouds in the background and mountains. And here's this gentleman who's kind of like
standing holding these things filled with grass, and all sorts of questions come up, like, why is he doing that? Where is he going? How does he get to live in this, like, in such a beautiful place? So I didn't know what his story was, and so it was a couple months later on a return trip, and I print out his photo, and I go out with my guide again, and we retrace our footsteps for that day, trying to find this guy. And it took a whole day to do it, and traveling by, like, motorboat and canoe and walking and car, and we get to this guy's village, and I start asking him, like, you know, finding out, like, what's life like and whatnot, and he's this young guy, you know, he's 23 years old. When we were trying to find him, he's, you know, we'd show his picture, and I remember showing it to, like, and there's, like, these few kind of younger girls, like late teens, and they would just be like, they were giggling because he was, like, the cute guy that all the girls liked. So he was, like, he was really popular. So we get to the village, I meet him, and all these people kind of gather around because why is somebody coming to the village here? And so we start asking him questions like, okay, well, it turns out he's married, he has a child, he's a farmer, and his life is pretty, you know, it's pretty basic. Like, every day is the same thing. But he ends up, I ask him, like, how he met his wife, and he sort of tells me this story about how her parents own the land that his parents, their house is on.
Okay.
So they were kind of like, you know, they were kind of linked in the community a little bit. And as they kind of grew up, you know, they would sort of go to festivals kind of together, and they would, you know, if they were going to, like, another village or something like that, they would, like, go and they would hang out at a tea shop there together.
Okay.
And he sort of told me, he's like, it was like kites in the sky. You know, if you have two kites and they're flying around, and if they're close to each other, like, you know, they'll inevitably sort of twist and, like, you know, they'll get intertwined. And I remember him I remember hearing this through my interpreter, because, like, I could get like half of this story, but some of it I couldn't quite get. And I remember hearing this from my interpreter, and I just knew, like, wow, like, it couldn't have. I just knew at that time. I was like, this is amazing. Like, how incredible is this? This is something that crosses, like, this is something that anybody in the world, we have billions of people, and this is something that, like, everyone can kind of relate to. Right. Like finding a partner, and like that sort of, like, dance that sort of that can happen. Like, this, it's like, it's who we are as human beings. And that was amazing. And, you know, I remember having, like, the biggest smile on my face as I was, like, jotting down all the notes and whatnot. On the other hand, like, there's a lot of times that, you know, I'll be curious, and of course, and asking questions, and it just doesn't quite get anywhere. So sometimes, like this, I get this really amazing picture. It just so happened I got the picture first here, and this really amazing story, and they just, like, boom, they mate right together. But it isn't always the case, certainly.
Very cool. So back to more of a photographic, I guess, sense. When you're looking at the images or taking images for this series, specifically in regards to, let's say, a specific person whose story you think there's something there and you want to flesh it out with some images. What do you think are the important aspects photographically to bring the story to life?
You know, I think that, I mean, one of the things that I would try to do is I would try to, because sometimes the picture would happen first before I hear the story. And sometimes it would happen afterwards. And so there would be these different ways that they would come about. But in choosing pictures for the project, I would try to have something that at least gives another layer to what's going on. Okay. So, you know, the picture itself can't tell the whole story of someone's life or the whole story of this thing that's happening in these last few years. But I wanted it to be more than a portrait. I wanted it to be more than just a headshot. Yeah. and have a series of headshots. I wanted it to be more. I wanted it to be like, I wanted there to be like bits of the environment. I wanted the color of the country, which is, is often so vibrant. I wanted another layer.
Yeah.
But I also didn't want it to be posed. I didn't want it to be like, okay, you stay here. We're going to wait for this. And we've got the studio lights and 1, 2, 3, snap, perfect shot. Okay, great. Yeah. And then I'm going to take all of these lights and all of this gear and go back to where I'm going, and you go back home. Like, it wasn't like that, but there wasn't necessarily a way to tell a whole story in the picture, and for sure, particularly when a picture happens first.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So a little bit about the country as a whole. What did you find out over the past 5 years? And obviously a lot has changed over the past 5 years. But what did you learn about Myanmar that ran counter to your preconceptions going in?
Well, I didn't really know much about the country when I went in. I didn't know about the longer term history.
Okay.
I knew a little bit about the shorter term history, and this would be around like since the kind of like the military sort of really took over in the late 80s around protests and the Aung San Suu Kyi. This is the Nobel Peace Prize laureate who was under house arrest for the better part of 20 years. And who's led the democracy movement essentially in the country.
Right.
So I'd known about some of those things, but there were a lot of things that I didn't know, and there would be no way to know, like how those changes would affect things, and how the hope of the people like would ebb and flow.
Okay.
Even over the last few years, there would be these times when, like the first time President Obama came to visit. People were lined up in the streets, and I remember like the next day already there were like posters printed out with a picture of him and with Aung San Suu Kyi, with this hope of democracy. Yeah. And a year later, much of that had gone away. And I remember one of my subjects telling me that it was like that the government was like Michael Jackson, and he said that it was like they're moonwalking. And it looks like they're going forward, but they're actually moving backwards. and so it was around these times that I could start to understand that over the course of decades, there had been hope for the people. Like the people the citizens there had felt hope was on the horizon and change was on the horizon. And many of those times it was just like taken away at the last minute. Yeah. And so it was this cautious, optimism. And that even now that there's been a change in government and which is very significant, there's still a cautious optimism that things won't change right away. But yeah, going in, admittedly, I knew very little about the country, and it's been the way that I've approached a lot of places, not all of them, but to kind of like figure it out when I get there, which is enjoyable, maybe slightly less productive, less efficient, but yeah, it's like peeling back the onion. It's like finding the pieces of the puzzle and then trying to figure out where they go afterwards. Even. Right. So yeah, it's this very complicated thing.
Has your experience with the country changed your perspective at large in relation to just life, the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think the depth to which I've gone, that I've gone to in Myanmar, and the people that I've met and whatnot, I think that makes me feel more grateful for what I have. Yeah. Growing up in Canada has given me opportunities that most people in Myanmar could only dream of. Right. And so I feel like it's really important not to take that for granted. Canada is by no means perfect. Nowhere is perfect. No person is perfect or anything like that. But I was born into something, into a place that has offered me a lot more freedom and opportunity than the vast majority of the world. So that's something. First off, is I feel grateful to be a Canadian and to be able to do this sort of work. But it's also taught me that like people, like we're all pretty much the same. Like we might have different cultures. People may believe in different religions. They might practice different things. We might eat different things. Yeah. We might wear different clothes. Our values might be a little bit different, but like at the core of it, like we're all in for the same things. Like we want to have, a better life. We want to have a better life than our parents did, an easier life. Yeah. And subsequently we want that for our children. We want to know that we're safe, that we don't have to be afraid. Yeah. We want to have a roof over our heads. We want to have clean water to drink, hopefully. Yeah. Something that I took for granted when I lived in Canada, and now tap water is like the most amazing thing ever. Yeah. Particularly in Canada. Yeah. And that we have that we have food to eat. Yeah. Like those sorts of things. Like there are these core things. And, that in general, the vast majority of people are really amazing. They're good people that would do anything for you. And I find that around the world. Mm-hmm. But with the time that I've spent in Myanmar, like that comes to play. Yeah. And maybe one more thing. So many lessons. But another thing is how resilient that we are. Like as human beings. Like we can put up with a lot. Like we can take a lot. Yeah. And I certainly see this in many of the subjects and my friends in Myanmar, that have been, imprisoned for political reasons. Yeah. Sometimes for decades. And, they're not angry. They're not vengeful. It's a thing that happened. They don't want it to happen to anybody else in the future. Yeah. But it's about like, how can we continue to make good with what we have? Yeah. And that is like incredible, because I think that before I went to Myanmar, I would have questioned whether or not I could do something like that. And by seeing people do that, by seeing good people do that, yeah, like what the value of speaking up is, speaking up for your rights, for freedom, a freedom of choosing this place that you live in. Yeah. That stuff is core to me. I'm very, very thankful for all of those lessons that people in Myanmar have taught me like this, even though they didn't even know that they were teaching me. Like they were telling me about their life, and I certainly get so much out of it, and that's part of the thing. Like I want to share those insights.
One of the coolest things that happened to me while I was there, and one of the lessons that I took was, so we had done a trek with with a guide, and it had been with two other people, a guy named Joe from the States and a guy named Adrian from France. And we got to know them pretty well, and then just happened to run into Joe 2 weeks later in Yangon and just in the street randomly. And he says, oh, he's big into the punk music scene back in the States. And he's like, oh, yeah, so I met this guy at the hostel I'm staying at, and he's heard about this punk show in a different part of the city tomorrow morning. And so it's a Sunday morning at like 11 a.m. is this punk show going to go on? And he's like, do you want to go? We're like, yeah, sure. And so we make our way out there, and there's like 11 bands that play, and just a ton of bands. And they're not able to get permits for the evening shows because it's punk music and it's heavily anti-government and a lot of the lyrics. And I guess it had loosened up a little bit at that point, but they were used to playing like illegal shows under bridges and just wherever they could find places to play, and they often got broken up by the police and whatnot. But it was really cool to see all these guys all in their punk gear and the studded jackets and everything, mohawks and like tattoos, everything. And it wasn't what I expected to find in Myanmar. For one, I didn't expect to find that scene you have the support that it did, but it was such a positive crowd, and they were all kind of united by their love of this music, that they were kind of all outcasts, obviously. You know, even in Canada and the US, that's a marginalized community, especially, you know, the very visually punk crowd, but in Myanmar especially. So there's just so much positivity, and they were all, you know, there was some meaning behind the music, because, you know, punk's been a very vocal genre, speaking out against, you know, whatever problems in society. And if anywhere there are problems in society, it's a country like that. And so, you know, there's a lot of meaning and intention behind the music. And then we found out afterwards that a couple of the guys, I think in the band that was putting it all on, they kind of organized this whole scene. They had their own screen printing shop where they did posters and shirts for all the bands and stuff like that. But they were also involved with Food Not Bombs. And so they would go out to the villages and buy food from these really poor villages who really needed the money. And then they would make all these meals, bring it back to Yangon, and kind of hand out meals to homeless people, prostitutes, and that kind of thing. And it just really made you think that here, you know, at least on my part, I was viewing these people as having a lot less than I do. Like, I have a lot more privilege, and I'm able to travel to their country as a tourist and, you know, take all this time off work to go have fun, essentially. And these guys, with what they have, are even doing these great things for others, and have still found a way to give of themselves. And it was just one of the most inspiring experiences that I've had anywhere, and something that I've really tried to internalize. But I think it was a great kind of showing of what the people are made of there. Yeah, definitely. Like, I feel like oftentimes we can be worried, like, you know, in Western cultures, like, sometimes we might have like the best intentions and think like, okay, well, once I make more money, like I'm getting by right now. Yeah. Once I get that next pay raise, then that's when I'm going to be able to donate to like that charity, or I'm going to be able to, like, once I get past this project, I'm going to be able to volunteer for this sort of thing. And like, it can be hard for that time to ever come, because there's always something else, right? Yeah. And by seeing people, and in this case in Myanmar, just doing it, and doing it with far less resources than we have to, you know, ourselves, you know, just show you that, like, there is no bar that you need to cross before you go to make a difference, whatever that difference is, right? Whether that's, you know, time or money or your resources or your expertise or whatnot, to give that to somebody else, you know, in whatever way it is. So, yeah. I guess, speaking of making a difference, do you have any hopes for this project in terms of changing people's perception of the country or opening up awareness? Yeah. You know, I hope that in this project that people come away with a couple of things. You know, it would be great if this country that most people don't even know exists, that it was even just a little bit on the radar now. You know, that's one step, and to know what the struggles are that people have in this part of the world, struggles and wins. I mean, it isn't all a struggle, right? Yeah, like struggles and wins. And then in hearing that and seeing that isn't necessarily the way that things are here, but that it's not all that different, right? You know, and that at the end it talks, you know, it's more about
humanity in general than about like a specific person on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
That it's much more universal.
Yeah. That's great. So I find often from a country that I've traveled to, there will be one specific image, one picture that every time I look at it, it brings me back immediately to that country. And I find often that it's not the iconic shot. It's something that could be completely random, but every time I look at it, it takes me back to that country and kind of encapsulates all my experiences there. I know you have done many trips to Myanmar, but I'm wondering if you have a specific image or set that'll transport you back there when you look at them.
There's a few. I mean, yeah, there's so many, to be honest, but but I've got there's one in particular where it wasn't even my shot. I didn't even take the picture.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, what it was this, on one of my first big trips, it was this really amazing event. I happened to stumble upon this fascinating Hindu ceremony procession, and I was sort of like, I ended up being like kind of wrapped up in it. And when I was there, I ended up meeting a bunch of people who I, and families who I met and who are part of this, as it turns out, are part of this project years and years later. And I went back to this street in this town with a bunch of pictures that I had shot. So I'd shot these pictures, a year or two earlier, and I'd taken pictures of people when I was there. And I thought, like, wouldn't it be great if I could give these pictures to people, since most people don't have pictures of themselves. Like, the vast majority do not have that. So I went walking around the streets, giving out these pictures, and there gets to be like a little bit of a crowd, and I'm flipping through, and people will be like yelling out to their friends or like pointing me down a street to go. And this one guy, he kind of comes out, and I didn't really recognize him, and I was showing him my pictures, and he was telling me like, oh, so and so essentially lives down the street here, but he owned a tea shop, and he kept on like wanting me to come in, and it was getting late in the day. I didn't have a lot of time, so I was kind of like, I couldn't really do that. So he ends up kind of running back, and he comes out with a photograph of me.
Oh, okay.
From that very same day. So I had been, on that day when I'd been walking around photographing this procession, I'm taking pictures of people. A year or 2 years later, I come back and I'm giving pictures out to people. And this guy somehow has a picture of me. Like, he had not only taken a picture of me on his like really basic little digital camera, but he'd printed it out.
Yeah.
And he had it up in his tea shop. And that picture, like, he ended up giving that to me.
Yeah.
And of all the things in all of my travels, like, that's one of the most, amazing sorts of things. And so when I see that picture, like, that picture is on my dresser here in Canada. Like, when I see that not only takes me back to the day when he shot that, when I was on one of my first major trip to the country and seeing this like amazing procession, but it also takes me back to meeting him and this way that Myanmar and I are sort of like linked together.
Yeah.
Like, what are the chances that this would sort of happen? Like, that I would even be coming back to the country.
Yeah.
And if I was coming back to the country, that I'd be coming back to this town. And if I was coming back to this town, I'd be coming back to this street. And that I'd be giving out pictures.
Right.
And here he has this laminated picture that had been up on the wall of his tea shop.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that tells so much about like the Myanmar experience for me. Like, there's so many layers to that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Wow. All right. So just getting towards the end here and wrapping up, I'm wondering if you have any last tips for photographers looking to specifically tell stories through their work?
Yeah, sure. I think the first part is like put the camera away and get to know a place before you go out to take your pictures.
Right.
In that way you'll be able to, interact, speak. Even if you don't speak the language, like everybody speaks hand signals, right? Everybody speaks sign language.
Yeah.
In that way, so interact. Treat people like people, rather than just like, a trophy.
Yeah.
That's going to be like, on your Instagram or on your wall.
Yeah.
So that would be number one. Number two would be like slow down, like take your time. Going and spending, half an hour at a market or something like that. Like that's not going to be enough time to get into a story, like to dig deep. So spend more time in less places. Give yourself time to let these things kind of like happen. And I suppose another thing is to be aware of the impact. So depending on where you are in the world, asking certain questions might not be appropriate. It might even be dangerous for people. So to think about what's going to be left when you leave. So when you are interviewing or you're taking pictures and whatnot, how are you leaving that situation afterwards?
Yeah.
If it was you and somebody was coming to your place, and they were doing this stuff, and then they do that and they leave, how would you want to be treated?
Right.
How would it make you feel? And I think the core of that is just treat people well.
Yeah.
And it's not just a it's not a checkbox. It's life.
Yeah.
So be curious and be respectful, and the good stuff will come to you.
Awesome. So 2 more questions. The second last one is, what have you got coming up next? I know you've got the Myanmar Untours, I think you're calling them, and a book later in the year. Yeah.
So a few things on the docket, involved with this project. So right now my first gallery show is on in Saskatoon, Canada, and I'm hoping to take this to Europe, to the United States, and also to Myanmar in the next couple of years.
Awesome.
So that's really exciting, and to continue to grow that part of the project. A book with many of these stories, many of these pictures, and more will be out later this year. So I'm pretty excited about that, because I want it to get to the most amount of people. And and the website that I've created with this is part of that too. That I know that that most people can't be here where the first exhibition is. So I still want to share the stories, share the photos. Not quite the same as seeing them giant and up on the wall, but it's something.
Yeah.
So I've got those going on, and after years of having people like clamoring to do tours, this year is finally the time. So I finally found a way to do it the way that I would want to do it, and to show the Myanmar that I would like to show. That I would like people to experience. So yeah, I've developed this. I spent many months developing this itinerary and putting everything into place for my first Untour. It's a small group tour, very exclusive in that there's only 8 spots. It's only really been announced last week, and already it's half full.
Awesome.
So that's pretty amazing.
And that's taking place this fall?
Yeah, it's running the end of October. It's October 30th through November 11th.
Okay.
Seeing many of Myanmar's most amazing sites, but also wrapped around, in fact, many of the people that are involved in my project, This Myanmar Life, meeting those people, hearing those stories, seeing what life is like.
Right.
For people that are there, rather than just a hop on the bus, hop
Yeah.
off the bus, hop on the bus, hop off the bus. So photography, adventure, culture, and wrapping up with one of my most favorite things in Myanmar. It's the Fire Balloon Festival,
Okay.
the Zondine. Not very many people have seen this festival. Not very many Westerners.
Yeah.
So it's a very unique opportunity to see something that you can't see anywhere else, anything like that anywhere else in the world. So I'm really excited to share that and all of the rest of Myanmar to people.
Very
Finally.
cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So where can people find you and keep up to date with all of the stuff that you've got going on?
Sure. So easiest place to find me is at my website, my main website, dustinmain.com. From there, you can see links to things like Instagram and Facebook. I do a lot of short story stuff on Instagram too, rather than just pretty pictures. You can find links there to This Myanmar Life, and you can find links to the Untour in Myanmar there as well. And for more photographic projects, you can visit lightmovescreative.org.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for doing this. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy. I really appreciate all the great questions and you putting this together here.
Wow, no problem. It's been, like I said, a lot of fun, and hopefully we can catch up again in the future.
You got it, brother.
So I had a lot of fun talking with Dustin today. I picked up a few tips on travel photography and storytelling. I hope you guys all picked something up from the interview as well. Dustin is an awesome guy, and I highly encourage you to go check out his work. I've linked to all his contact info as well as This Myanmar Life and everything you need to know about him in the notes. So check him out there, and until next time, take care.